You typed her name into your phone 3 weeks ago. You didn't press send. You still haven't. The message is still sitting there in the draft. Maybe it's not even a full message. Maybe it's just her name in the search bar, the conversation pulled up, the cursor blinking in the empty box. You looked at it. You thought about what to say, and then you locked the phone and set it face down on the table and told yourself you'd do it later. That was 3 weeks ago, and she's not the only one. There's a small, quiet list of these. The friend from your old job, the one who moved, the person you were close to before the thing happened, or before nothing happened at all, and you just drifted. Every name on that list is someone you meant to text, someone you would genuinely be glad to hear from, and somehow the message never leaves your hands. Here's what makes this strange. Not sad, strange. Because researchers actually measured what happens when people do send that message. Peggy Liu at the University of Pittsburgh ran a series of studies with almost 6,000 people. The setup was simple. One group reached out to someone in their circle they hadn't talked to in a while. Just a text, just a hi, just thinking of you. Before they sent it, they guessed how much the other person would appreciate it. The other group were the ones receiving those messages, and they reported how much they actually appreciated it. The senders guessed low, every time. Across 13 separate studies, the people reaching out consistently underestimated how much the other person was glad they did. And it didn't matter if it was a close friend or someone they barely knew. It didn't matter if it was just a note or a note with a small gift attached. The gap was always the same direction. You think it'll mean a little. It means a lot. So the person on the other end of your unsent message is, statistically, waiting to be more pleased than you expect, and you still haven't sent it. 2,000 years ago, a Roman philosopher was already writing to a friend he almost never saw, and he had a theory for exactly this kind of silence. We'll get to him. Because first, there's a better question. If the math says send it, why didn't you? The honest answer is that it doesn't feel safe. And that word is going to sound dramatic for something as small as a text message. Stay with it anyway, because it's more literal than you'd think. Watch what actually happens in the half second before you don't send it. You pull up her name, and somewhere in that pause, your mind runs a little preview. What if she's moved on? What if it's weird now? What if she reads it and thinks, why is he texting me? What if she doesn't reply at all, and you have to sit with that? You don't decide to think any of this. It just arrives, fully formed, faster than you can type the word, hey. That speed is the tell. Because it turns out your brain treats social disconnection as a genuine threat, and it does the threat scanning before you're conscious of it. Stephanie and John Cacioppo at the University of Chicago wired people up to high-density EEG, basically reading electrical activity across the whole scalp, millisecond by millisecond. Then they showed them images. Some were ordinary threats, like a snake. Some were social threats, a person being excluded, someone being mocked, the specific picture of not belonging. And they measured how fast the brain reacted to each. For people who were lonelier, the brain lit up faster and harder for the social threats than the physical ones, not after they thought about it, before. The reaction to being left out was landing in the brain earlier than conscious awareness could catch it. There's an old reason for this. For most of human history, being cut off from the group wasn't a bad evening. It was a death sentence. A person alone on the edge of the tribe was a person who didn't survive the winter. So the nervous system learned to treat the possibility of rejection the way it treats a drop off a cliff, as something to flinch away from automatically before the thinking brain even gets a vote. Which means when you pull up her name and feel that small resistance, that faint no, not now, that isn't laziness. It isn't even really a decision. It's a 200,000-year-old alarm going off over a text message. I used to think I was just being considerate, giving people their space, not wanting to bother them. Turns out my brain was running a threat scan on a guy I've known since college, which would almost make sense if the story the brain was telling you were true. Here's the story it tells. Too much time has passed. It'd be strange to reach out now. You're busy, they're busy, everybody's busy. That's just how it goes as you get older. All of it sounds reasonable. All of it is mostly wrong. Lara Aknin at Simon Fraser University and Gillian Sandstrom at the University of Sussex ran a study in 2024 that measured how willing people were to reach out to an old friend they'd lost touch with. Then they compared it to how willing those same people were to do other things. Talk to a stranger, pick up a piece of litter off the ground. People rated reaching out to an old friend as no more appealing than striking up a conversation with a complete stranger. And they were less willing to do it than to pick up trash. Let that sit wrong for a second. Someone you used to know, someone you laughed with, told real things to, had years with, and the prospect of texting them registers about the same as talking to a person you've never met, lower than collecting garbage. And when the researchers asked why, the reasons weren't what you'd guess. Being busy? That ranked at the bottom. The real reasons were quieter. They were afraid the old friend wouldn't want to hear from them. They felt too much time had passed to have a good excuse. It felt awkward. The mechanism underneath all of it is the strange part. When enough time goes by without contact, the friend doesn't just fade, they get reclassified. Your brain slowly moves them out of the people I know folder and into the strangers folder. That's why reaching out to them starts to feel like cold calling. Not because the friendship died, because the filing changed. I have a friend I haven't spoken to in 4 years. Over something so small, I genuinely can't reconstruct it anymore. I don't avoid him because I'm angry. I avoid him because enough time passed that texting him now feels like introducing myself to a stranger who happens to remember my birthday. That's the trap, laid out plainly. The distance makes reaching out feel risky, and the felt risk keeps you from closing the distance, and every week you don't, the folder gets a little more permanent, which is a strange problem to have because someone already solved it in writing by hand 2,000 years ago. His name was Seneca, Roman, 1st century, one of the most famous Stoics who ever lived. And most people, when they hear Stoic, think of a man who trained himself not to need anyone. Cold, self-contained, above it all. That's the beginner's version. It's also wrong. Seneca had a friend named Lucilius. Younger, lived far away, the two of them rarely in the same place. And instead of accepting that distance the way you and I accept it, with a shrug and a vague intention to reconnect someday, Seneca wrote to him. Constantly. We still have more than 100 of these letters, 100, to one friend he almost never saw in person. In one of them, letter 55, he's out walking near the coast, and he starts writing to Lucilius mid-thought, and he says something that stops you if you're paying attention. He says a friend you hold in your mind is never actually absent, that he can see Lucilius, hear him, feel him right there, to the point where he jokes he can't tell anymore if he's writing letters or just taking notes on a conversation they're already having. That's not a man who trained himself not to need people. That's a man who refused to let distance turn his friend into a stranger. He just kept manually closing the gap, over and over, for years. I used to think Stoicism meant needing people less, building yourself into someone who could take the loss of anyone. Reading Seneca's actual letters wrecked that idea pretty fast. The man wrote to one friend over 100 times. That's not detachment. That's the opposite. That's someone doing the work of staying close on purpose, because he understood that closeness isn't a thing you have, it's a thing you keep doing. He didn't have the folder problem, because he never let anyone sit in the drawer long enough to be refiled. So Seneca had the instinct right. What he didn't have was the data. We do. Put the 3 findings next to each other, because they line up in a way that's almost unsettling. Seneca, with no psychology, no fMRI, no idea what an EEG was fighting exactly the mechanism Aknin and Sandstrom would measure 2,000 years later. The reclassification, the slow slide from friend to stranger. He beat it the only way it can be beaten, by not letting the silence get long enough to start. And every one of those 100+ letters was built on an assumption. Seneca wrote to Lucilius as if his letters landed hard, as if they mattered enormously to a man he rarely saw. He never once seems to have worried that he was bothering him, that it had been too long, that Lucilius would read the letter and think, "Why is Seneca writing again?" That assumption is the exact thing Peggy Lou measured. The senders who guess low, and the recipients who appreciate it far more than the sender ever believes. Seneca guessed high. He assumed his reaching out mattered, and by every modern number we have, he was right, and the rest of us are the ones getting it wrong. So here's where your unsent message sits. That draft on your phone, 3 weeks old, the one you keep not sending because it might not mean much and it might be weird. A Roman man who's been dead for 2,000 years already ran the experiment. He wrote the letter every time. He assumed it landed. And a lab full of people with brain scanners confirmed in 2022 that his assumption was the correct one and your hesitation is the error. The instinct that's keeping your thumb off send isn't protecting you from anything. It's just wrong in a way that's been documented from 2 completely different directions, separated by 20 centuries. Knowing all of this, by the way, changes nothing on its own. That part's been tested too. The same researchers who found the stranger effect tried to fix it. They sat people down and taught them everything you just learned. The appreciation gap, the reclassification, the whole mechanism. They explained clearly that the old friend would almost certainly be glad to hear from them. And then they gave people the chance to actually reach out. It barely moved the needle. Understanding the problem did not make people send the message. The insight, on its own, was inert. You can know all of this, really know it, and still leave the draft sitting there. What worked was smaller and stranger and almost too simple to trust. They had people practice first, not on the hard person, on an easy one. Reach out to a current friend, someone you talk to all the time, someone there's no risk with at all. Just do the motion. And then, warm from that, go to the harder name. That was it. One low-stakes rep before the real one. And it worked where all the explaining had failed, because the thing blocking you was never a lack of understanding. It was a cold start. The first message, aimed at the person you've drifted furthest from, is the heaviest possible lift, and you keep trying to lift it first. Of course, your thumb won't move. I texted the friend from 4 years ago while writing this, actually. Not because I read the studies and felt ready, because I'd already sent 3 easy texts that morning. My brother, a guy from work, someone whose reply I already knew I'd get. And by the 4th one, his name didn't feel like a stranger's anymore. It just felt like the next text. So the draft on your phone, the one from the start, 3 weeks cold. You're probably still not going to send that one first. Don't. Send an easy one. Text the person you already know will write back, the one there's no weight to at all. Let it be nothing. And then, while your hand still remembers how, go back to the hard name. You don't need the perfect opening line. You need the one before it.